Somewhere over the Soviet Union, in the spring of 1968, a reconnaissance mission was in trouble. A Soviet surface-to-air missile had just been fired, radar locked, warhead armed, target acquired. The pilot didn't flinch, he didn't maneuver, he didn't deploy countermeasures, he simply pushed the throttle forward, and the missile never caught him. The SR-71 Blackbird is the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever built, a machine so advanced that when it was retired in 1998, it still held records set in 1976. A plane designed to outrun anything the enemy could throw at it. And it did, every single time. This is the full story of the most extraordinary aircraft in history. And it begins, like all great American secrets, in the desert. It's 1957. The Cold War is at its most paranoid. The United States desperately needs to know what the Soviets are building. But there's a problem. You can't simply fly a plane over the USSR and take photographs. Or rather, you couldn't. Not without risking the most dangerous international incident in history. So the CIA turned to a man named Kelly Johnson. Johnson ran a top-secret division of Lockheed Aircraft, operating out of a converted circus tent in Burbank, California. They called it the Skunk Works. Johnson's team had already produced miracles. The U-2 spy plane had been flying over the Soviet Union since 1956, photographing military installations with impunity, floating so high at 70,000 feet that the Soviets couldn't touch it. A U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory. Powers survived. The plane did not. And suddenly, the United States found itself in a geopolitical firestorm. Its spy program exposed, its pilot captured, its president forced to lie, and then admit the lie on the world stage. The U-2 was grounded for missions over the USSR. The CIA needed something new, something faster, something that no missile, not ever, could reach. Kelly Johnson got to work. The design requirements Johnson received from the CIA read like science fiction. The aircraft had to cruise at Mach 3.2, more than 3 times the speed of sound. It had to fly at altitudes exceeding 85,000 feet. And it had to be virtually invisible to radar. For context, Mach 3.2 is roughly 2,200 miles per hour. At that speed, you travel the distance from New York to Los Angeles in under 70 minutes. But the engineering problems were staggering. At Mach 3, the friction of air against the aircraft's skin generates temperatures exceeding 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Most metals would simply melt. Most materials didn't exist that could handle it. Johnson's team solved this with titanium, an extraordinarily strong, heat-resistant metal that was, at the time, almost impossibly difficult to work with. At the peak of production, the Skunk Works was the largest consumer of titanium in the world. There was just one irony. The majority of that titanium was being purchased covertly from the Soviet Union. The United States was secretly buying the raw material for its most classified spy plane from the very nation it intended to spy on. The SR-71's design was unlike anything before it. The fuselage was built to expand at operating temperature. The plane actually leaked fuel on the ground because its panels only sealed properly when the metal heated up at speed. Pilots would take off with near-empty tanks and refuel immediately from an airborne tanker, then accelerate to operational speed. Even the black paint was revolutionary. The aircraft was coated in a special ferret-infused paint that absorbed radar energy, reducing its radar signature significantly, and also helped radiate the tremendous heat generated by supersonic flight. Let's look at what this machine actually was. The SR-71 was 107 feet long, about the length of a 10-story building laid on its side. Its twin Pratt and Whitney J58 engines were unlike any power plant built before or since. At low speeds, they operated like conventional turbojets. But above Mach 2.2, they transitioned to a hybrid mode, part turbojet, part ramjet, essentially becoming a completely different type of engine while still in flight. At full throttle with afterburners engaged, Each engine produced over 32,000 pounds of thrust, generating a shock diamond exhaust plume visible from miles away. The aircraft's structure incorporated Chinese, sharp blended edges running along the fuselage, which served a dual purpose. Aerodynamically, they generated lift and stability at high speed. From a stealth perspective, they scattered radar returns away from ground-based detection systems. The cockpit was a pressurized capsule. Pilots wore full pressure suits, essentially spacesuits, because at 85,000 feet, if the cockpit depressurized, the nitrogen in your blood would literally boil. The SR-71 flew its first operational mission in 1968, and over the next 3 decades, it would overfly virtually every geopolitical hotspot on Earth: North Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, Libya, and, though never officially acknowledged, the Soviet Union. In its entire operational history, spanning over 3,500 flights, the SR-71 was never shot down, never even hit. Over 1,000 missiles were fired at it across its career. The standard procedure when a missile lock was detected was simple: accelerate. The SR-71 was so fast that most SAMs simply couldn't intercept it. By the time the missile reached the altitude where the SR-71 had been, the aircraft was already 15 miles farther along its track. The intelligence gathered was extraordinary. The SR-71's cameras could photograph a 100,000 square mile swath of territory in a single pass, from 80,000 feet, with resolution good enough to read a newspaper headline on the ground. In one 6-hour mission, the aircraft could cover more ground than an entire fleet of U-2s in a week. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, SR-71 footage provided real-time intelligence on Egyptian and Syrian troop movements so precise that American analysts could track individual tank positions across the Sinai Peninsula. One of the most remarkable missions took place over Libya in 1986, following the U.S. bombing campaign known as Operation El Dorado Canyon. Within hours of the strikes, an SR-71 was overhead, photographing the results. The aircraft flew from its base in England, conducted its reconnaissance over Libya, 1,800 miles away, and returned home. Total mission time, just over 4 hours. To fly the SR-71, you had to be exceptional even by the standards of the United States Air Force's most elite pilots. The selection process was brutal. Only a handful of pilots qualified each year, drawn from the pool of test pilots and senior fighter aviators. Every crew consisted of 2 men: the pilot, who flew the aircraft, and the reconnaissance systems officer, the RSO, who operated the sensors, managed the navigation, and monitored for threats. They sat in tandem, sealed in their pressure suits, in a cockpit barely larger than a sports car. The physical demands were extreme. At Mach 3, the aircraft was not designed to be maneuvered. Every input had to be measured. A sharp correction at that speed could rip the aircraft apart. Pilots described it as flying on rails. One pilot described his first Mach 3 run like this: "You don't feel the speed. The world below you is still. You're in your own pressurized universe, in utter silence inside your helmet, watching numbers on instruments that seem impossible. And then you look at the fuel gauge, and you realize you've burned what took an entire mission to load, and you're still accelerating." Several SR-71 crews had to eject from their aircraft during development and early operational flights. The ejection seat itself was a marvel. It could operate at over 2,000 miles per hour, with specialized stabilization to prevent the pilot from tumbling to death from the aerodynamic forces. It was never used in combat, but it worked in testing. The pilots who survived those ejections described the experience as, briefly, being a human bullet. On September 1, 1974, an SR-71 flew from New York to London in 1 hour, 54 minutes, and 56 seconds. The Concorde, the fastest commercial airliner ever built, took 3 hours and 30 minutes. That record still stands today. In 1976, an SR-71 set the absolute speed record for air-breathing aircraft, 2,193 miles per hour, Mach 3.3. It also set the absolute altitude record for horizontal flight, 85,068 feet. Both records still stand. Not because aircraft technology hasn't advanced. It has enormously. but because no nation has ever built another aircraft designed to do what the SR-71 did. In the age of satellites, the world simply moved on. When the Air Force officially retired the SR-71 in 1990, citing costs of $200 to $300 million per year to operate, there was outrage from within the intelligence community. Within months, a gap in reconnaissance capability became apparent. The SR-71 was briefly reactivated in 1995, before being permanently retired in 1998. On its final flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., an SR-71 crossed the country in 68 minutes and 17 seconds, setting a coast-to-coast record that will almost certainly never be broken by a manned aircraft. The SR-71's legacy runs through everything that followed it. The stealth technology pioneered on its airframe directly influenced the development of the F-117 Nighthawk and the B-2 Spirit. Its titanium construction techniques revolutionized aerospace manufacturing, and its engine technology was the foundation of modern high-performance military propulsion systems. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the SR-71 is this. When it was designed, the engineers at Skunk worked with slide rules. There were no computers, no finite element analysis software, no computer-aided design. Kelly Johnson and his team produced the most sophisticated aircraft in history using pencils, engineering intuition, and pure genius. The Cold War is over. The SR-71 is in museums. But somewhere in the archives of Lockheed's Skunk Works, and in the classified budget lines of agencies we don't know about, engineers are working on whatever comes next. And if history is any guide, we won't know about it for another 50 years. If you want more stories like this, classified programs, legendary aircraft, the untold history of flight, subscribe to Iron Skies. Every week, we dig into the aircraft that changed history. And next week, we're looking at the plane that predated the SR-71, the aircraft so dangerous to fly it killed more of its own pilots than the enemy ever did. That video is right here. I'll see you up there.